To discuss this, let's go to our panel. In Abuja, we are joined by Esther Ikubaje. She's a campaigner for Amnesty International Nigeria. Mike Omeri is a former Director General at Nigeria's National Orientation Agency and was also a commissioner at various government ministries. And Perry Brimah is a presidential candidate in next year's election. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers from Abuja. Perry, let me begin with you. These women they call BOKO HARAM brides. Do you support their reintegration back into society?
Thank you, Mr. Imran, for having me on your show. To Nigeria and the rest of the larger world. On the topic of the amnesty, it's the broad topic, which I believe that, and on whether or not wives of Boko Haram, who may or may not have been involved in terror, and then Boko Haram terrorists themselves should be granted any form of amnesty, which they currently are being given, has certain stipulations according to Nigeria's constitution, which I believe should have to be legally considered. Nigeria's constitution, according to section 175 of the 1999 constitution, stipulates the regulations for an amnesty to be granted. And for any amnesty to be granted, the Council of State must be consulted. So it's not a unilateral decision that we can make, or the president can make, or Nigeria's military can make, as they currently have, because an amnesty has been given, which I believe is unconstitutional. According to section 175, the Council of State must be consulted, and that includes all past heads of state or presidents, past chief justices, current National Assembly, and so many of these officers, current and past of current and past administration.
Okay. So let me take that and pose it to Esther. Esther, I think the subtext here is that if the Council of States was to be consulted with, we'd probably be in a situation where there'd be no amnesty, because even though Boko Haram has been degraded, they are still out on the battlefield and there's an active war against them, right? So if it was put to more and more people, democratically it would seem, Nigerians, leaders and civilians would be against this sort of amnesty. Is that the way it is, Esther?
So for me, I think the talking point here should be about the issue of stigmatization of women as Boko Haram wives. At Amnesty International, based on the research that we have done, of course, it's very clear that some of these women might be Boko Haram wives, while some of them are being stigmatized because of their association with Boko Haram. So I think that's where we need to start this discussion from, because it's not about the issue of amnesty. It's mainly about reintegration and the palpable fear in the communities in the Northeast about the reintegration of these women back into the society.
Right. Okay.
Based on the research that we have done also, we even discovered, Imran, that in the camps for internally displaced people, these women, no one is even ready to interact with them. So I think that's where we should start this discussion from.
So let me then take up, so certainly, and sorry to interrupt you, right, because I want to keep it moving on, and I want to bring in Mike. Let me ask Mike if he agrees that we need to, first of all, look at these women and separate them out and make a decision as to who was more sort of actively involved and who might have been categorized as more active in terms of Boko Haram, and maybe the prospect of amnesty for them, and others who would be further along the spectrum of being victims who were just caught up in something beyond their control. Is that what we need to do, Mike?
Yes, Imran. First and foremost, let's look at it from a wider perspective. There are wives of Boko Haram or insurgents who were accomplices and colluded with their husbands to commit the heinous crimes that we are talking about. There are other innocent ones who became associates of Boko Haram by circumstances, either through kidnap and no just really a free choice of theirs. We must separate these people, give them the necessary counseling and involve that, which would also involve a DDR. In doing that, we must also get the society, the communities where these people will be returned to understand that the people coming back to join them have undergone a serious, strenuous process of rehabilitation and counseling. They have accepted and seen reason why they ought not to have joined the insurgent activity in the first place, and the society is now prepared to accept them. Once that is done, even the issue of stigmatization may not arise. But you cannot just wake up in the morning and bring people and say, these are former wives of Boko Haram, and you want them accepted in society. People have, the people you are joining, I mean, the communities are left with deep wounds in their hearts of loss of husbands and children and so forth and so on. So we must have a broad-based approach.
Okay, so Esther, would you accept that in some circumstances, particularly if, whether via evidence or rumor, somebody who's being reintegrated into a society has a connection to atrocities, the people in that community who might have lost loved ones are not going to be the most warmly welcoming, right?
Of course. As I mentioned earlier about the palpable fear in those communities, no one will be happy to have them back. And that's where the reintegration process needs to happen. A lot of orientation needs to happen because people want to know what the Nigerian government has done in terms of ensuring justice, particularly for people who are alleged to have committed those crimes. So if women have been identified as being accomplices or have even carried out some of those heinous crimes, of course, there is the role of the state to prosecute and bring them to justice. But beyond that as well, there is need for reorientation. There's a need for sensitization among those communities. The government needs to conduct nationwide sensitization programs in terms of letting those people from the communities know what exactly has taken place. What has changed about these women? What has changed between the time that they were with Boko Haram, whether as women forced into marriages or whether as victims of kidnap? Of course, what has the government done since then? So those are some of the issues that needs to come to the fore in terms of reorientation and conducting community-based sensitization programs, particularly on this issue.
So, Perry, sensitization, reorientation, rehabilitation, counseling, does the state have the capacity and the capability to do this while it's still fighting a war against Boko Haram?
Thank you. I believe the state has to do it. So even if we have to employ foreign assistance in developing the capacity to reorient, we must do it. However, we cannot step outside the law, and I'm very particular about law and legality. Anybody who has been involved, be it a man or a woman, a wife or a youth, who has been involved in acts of terror which have claimed lives or in rapes of people, cannot be reoriented, cannot be granted an amnesty except under the conditions stipulated by the law. Now, so it's on an individual approach. Those who have not been involved in such things can be and should promptly be reoriented, and we must, including financially and otherwise, make sure that the society is ready to accept them. The terrorists who have perpetrated acts of terror must not be reoriented into society. So the first thing Nigeria has to do is be able to divide between those who have been involved in acts of terror and those who have not.
Criminality aside, Mike, if people have been brainwashed, even though they might not have committed a crime, how do you deprogram them in the Nigerian context? What do you tell them? What do they do?
Well, two things. First and foremost, we must embrace the concept of transitional justice, where appropriate punishment is given to people and appropriate reparation and compensation is given to victims. That is on the one side. On the issue of reintegration and orientation, I run an agency that is in all the 774 local government areas of the country. And I know it has capacity and can develop social psychological messages that will help mitigate the effects of of the crime committed against the communities and individuals. You see, fortunately, we are a deeply religious nation. And apart from that, we also rely on persons of influence to communicate certain basic feelings that can, help reduce tension in society. So we need to just go back to those. We've always had basic institutions in the communities through our emirs and chiefs and community leaders. We have local government just to strengthen the administration, the processes. And of course, what we need now is a communication from government and everyone that we need to form a grand alliance or national solidarity against acts of terror and terrorism in itself, so that we see less of politicization of the issue and more of thinking as a nation confronted with a challenge that is not just domiciled in the Northeast or any part of the country, but that Nigerians are involved and therefore requires the collective will, collective determination and understanding of the issues. Therefore, we can create appropriate messaging for the communities.
How much harm, for those who are certainly, and how much harm, Esther, has been done over the years by the fact that the military has also been accused of committing atrocities and has done terrible things to people just suspected of being with Boko Haram?
So for us at Amnesty International, it's more about accountability. We cannot have the issue of reintegration without ensuring justice and accountability. And it all starts from there, because there is need to go back to the drawing board to address some of the underlying issues of injustice, issues of rape of women, atrocities committed not just by Boko Haram, but also by security forces in Nigeria. So there's need for accountability, and that's what we've always called for. There is need for truth-telling. There is need to ensure that women's experiences, particularly in the conflict in Northeast Nigeria, shapes, the policies around ensuring peace, and particularly ensuring a lasting peace in Northeast of Nigeria. So women's experiences should shape that.
Okay, so Perry, very finally, in terms of the international community, everybody's for bring back our girls, but does anybody care about what happens when the girls come back?
It's a big problem, and the problem is not just with the girls. The problem is with all people of the country. The social welfare for people of the country is horrible. We don't know where a lot of the girls are. We heard, some of them have been taken abroad or helped otherwise. But the rehabilitation, there is an announcement in Nigeria. This is typically how government runs. There's an announcement when things happen, but after that, the follow-up and maintenance is subliminal and woeful. The larger issue here is that it's not just those 200 girls. Those 200 girls were sort of used as a kind of marker for a bigger problem. There are so many, and I'm talking about tens of thousands of other people who have been abducted by Boko Haram and who have been released. And we need to think about this large picture. And there's just no public record of the successful rehabilitation of so many people. And I'm talking of tens of thousands who, and this should be a primary, government project that we should all be able to see and see how far it's going. But it's not so far, the results are a dismissal.
Well, it's been good to learn from all of you today. I thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Esther Ikubaje, Mike Omeri, and Perry Brimah, thanks again for joining us on the Newsmakers.